Hey there, listener. Welcome to the Deep Share Podcast. I'm your host, Andy Rouse, and for the last couple of decades, I've slowly been opening my eyes to a very different world than the one I grew up hearing about. And the more conversations I have with interesting people, the more mystifying this world becomes. So without further ado, let's get deep.
We've got science to celebrate! Demons bliss now! Psychopathy, come on!
There is rebellion in the wind. It will be crushed.
Everything I've said is true. It's real.
Dinosaur fossils? God put those here to test our faith.
A damn lie. I saw them with my own eye.
Did IQs just drop sharply while I was away?
We did illusions, man. None of it is true. I'm not insane. This is mass madness, you maniac. In God's name, you people are the real thing. We are the illusion.
What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the Deep Share. Thanks for listening. Thanks for tuning in. I gotta tell you guys, dealing with reality melting all around me was a lot easier when I was young and childless. I was one person facing the world, and for a long time, I was content in just watching it burn from a lawn chair. But having a kid put me face to face all over again with the ugliness, the corruption, the evil. But I'm taking it one day at a time and learning as much as I can from as many insightful people as I can. And tonight is no exception. Joining me is Lindsay Sharman, host of the Rogue Ways podcast and also The Middle Path, an educator and mentor, and author of many books, including her newest, All Endings Are Beginnings. This was an awesome chat. Lindsay gave me a lot of great resources and tons to think about. She's one of the great minds of our beautiful community of truth seekers and wayward spiritual misfits, so please welcome Lindsay Sharman.
Hello.
Hey, Lindsay. Welcome to the show.
Nice to meet you.
How's it going?
Good. How are you?
Not too bad. I'm all right, considering the state of the world currently. You know,
Yeah.
hanging in there. How about yourself?
Same. Pretty good, given that everything seems to be crazy. But it's so funny because everything seems to be so crazy and falling apart. And at the same time, like, I've never been better. So there's like an inverse relationship going on here.
Dude, I totally can. That resonates with me big time. My wife and I both have spent, like, ever since this all started, it's been like up and up and up on like the spiritual scale, the growth scale. So that's good, you know, while the rest of the world seems to kind of crumble and fall apart, I guess.
Yeah. And maybe that's just the illusion, you know, they like to promote that, and that's the media, and that's what sort of the people caught up in the media are projecting. But then, like, you know, if we're all experiencing this spiritual enhancement and deepening, then obviously that's got to be permeating out into the world somewhat. And so who knows what's really going on?
Yeah, that's a good point, because, I mean, you figure we've been talking about crazy conspiracy theories for decades, and there's plenty of society with nice straight suits on saying, get a job, hippie, you're crazy, whatever. Yeah. So even people like that are kind of waking up a little bit more than they were before, even if they're still considering us all crazy. You know what I mean?
Right. It's true. They're like, maybe I need to go talk to that crazy hippie, actually.
Maybe. So for my audience, could you give a little bit of background about what came first? Were you an author first, or was it the tarot that brought you into the spirit? What happened? How did it all transpire? You don't have to tell your whole life story, just a little bit of it. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it's hard to encapsulate. I definitely was a writer first. I started writing as a form of like self-therapy when my father died. Actually, one of my counselors said, you know, this is a good way to just get things out and whatever. And I was like there, and I just started journaling like all day, every day, as much. I'd fill up journals and get new ones. And this is, you know, I was 11 years old. And honestly, to be honest, before that, I was writing short stories and a very advanced child as well. So I definitely have always been a writer and a reader. And so I would say that was first, quote unquote. But the tarot came in pretty early too. That was probably about, I always have to guess because I don't have it's not like if I went back to my diaries, I'd be able to tell an exact date, but I haven't done that yet. So I guess just somewhere around like 14, 15, maybe I started doing tarot.
It's been ingrained there for a while. Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool.
And then that led directly to my deeper spiritual experiences because, part of them was deeply intertwined in me doing tarot and doing it very incorrectly on the spiritual level and getting some pretty negative attachments there. So they're all kind of intertwined,
Yeah, definitely. I hear you. So what I really wanted to talk about, at least first with you, is, just the fact that you were a full-time teacher and now you're still teaching.
Well, I guess my fans of Rogue Ways, my show, and Middle Path, my other show, they always tell me that I am still teaching. So I guess, via the show.
Really? Absolutely.
Yeah. And I do like homeschool consultation, educational consultation. And so I teach people who are teaching, but I don't do public school or private school classroom teaching anymore. And I hope to never do so again, despite my deep love of teaching in classrooms and the students there.
Right. That I can totally agree with you there. And that's what I've been kind of looking into over the course of the past year. Like, what kind of parent am I going to be with my perspective, putting my child through this school system? You know what I mean? He's only 3 right now. So it's like right there. You know what I mean? If it wasn't for the pandemic, he'd probably already be involved. You know what I mean? So it's getting down to the wire. The world is getting crazier. I'm getting less paranoid and more just confident that everything is absolutely fucked and it's on purpose and all this stuff. So I really couldn't wait to talk to you about just your perspective on education itself and how we can successfully navigate as parents with our young children in this ever-increasing propaganda state. I know we all kind of grew up in it and freed ourselves of it, but it just seems very different right now.
Yeah, we were the lucky ones, right? Because we also know people who we grew up with who were pretty smart and maybe even saw through a lot of it, and then right now are not, they're in full denial mode with their head in the sand and haven't woken up fully. So we know that even if you are intelligent, if you're in that system long enough and you absorb some of it's a culture of psychopathy. And, I outlined it in a recent article I wrote, which is Conditioned by Psychopathy is the name of the article if anyone wants to read it. And it's just a really good overview of psychopathy, sociopathy, and borderline personality disorders and personality disorders, and how they're all pretty much on the same spectrum, and they're all something that our culture intentionally creates and deepens and invites and just reinforces all throughout our lives. And so even if we're intelligent, our emotional selves often get incredibly damaged by this system. And that is, like you said, by design. And it is getting worse and worse all of the time because we're more and more saturated with that mindset and that set of behaviors. And so we accept it more and more, and it's saturated in our media. It's just reflected everywhere, and it's just getting more and more overt and obtuse. And so it's no longer strange to be a psychopath or a sociopath or to treat people in this way. It's accepted. It's even celebrated sometimes, and it's often... I was thinking about this today, that it's in so many ways, anything that is compassionate or empathic or intuitive or any of these things that are actually like deep traits of being a human being, a fully fledged human being, those are very shunned in a way, like you're the weirdo, there's something wrong with you, you're weak, and all these things, whether men and women, we, all of us, it's not a gender thing. It's just like a message that we receive over and over again. So I don't know if I answered your question or not, but that's,
I think, I asked one.
Yeah.
How to navigate this world. My God, it's such a broad thing to even attempt to answer anyway.
Yeah.
But talking about the whole like indoctrination kind of level of things. Looking back at my education, I graduated in 2003. So up until that point, I can, perfectly visualize the programming that was going on. Now, definitely, I've, escaped the matrix, as they say, but I feel as though the masters, whatever you want to call them, I don't know.
I like to call them the, either the psychopath class or the predator class or the parasite class.
Yeah.
because I don't want to give them that status of master or elite. I totally am with you. I say the same thing, but I'm trying to change my language so I can take that away from them.
That seems to be the recent message we're all kind of receiving and giving to each other. You know,
Yeah.
right after the new year, I was hearing Greg Carlwood, Sam Tripoli, just everybody was talking about turning over a new leaf and, you know, trying to leave that negativity behind when we can, for sure. Crap. There goes my train of thought.
My bad.
No, that's okay. No, that's fine.
I derailed you.
That's all right. Just okay.
Oh,
so
the indoctrination.
Yeah, the
I think.
indoctrination.
Yeah.
So like now it's starting to seem like the predator class, you know, they get better and better and better. Just like bullets get better as bulletproof vests get better. It's just physics, you know. These predators get better and better at indoctrination as well, it seems. Where now I'm hearing wild reports of like, you know, syllabuses and teachers suggesting that, you know, the students should have an absolute barrier from their parents, and what we're going to be teaching them should be for only their eyes, and their parents are infringing upon their own privacy and all that. And these are children we're talking about. We're not talking about 15-year-olds, 16-year-olds. We're talking about very small adolescents. And I really worry that the indoctrination is of a whole new breed. And, you know, what kind of education is actually being given anymore in these schools?
Yes, it's not education. Honestly, it is just indoctrination. And it's really hard to get people to understand just how true that is, because we have it so drilled into us that school is teaching our students, our kids, these things, and that they need those things to have a job. It's almost never true. If you spent time as an adult with a little bit more open eyes and understanding, you know, as a fly on the wall of your kid's normal day in school, you would see, first of all, that there might be, on a really good, really focused day, out of the 7.5 hours of education they're supposedly getting, there might be 3 hours of actual instruction or practice of any given skill set. And that's just the truth. It's just true. There's a massive waste of time, even in the best schools, even with like really strict teachers or whatever you want to say. There's just very little direct instruction or otherwise instruction, and very little practice of any sort of skills. And so that's what any kind of education should be basically boiled down to: is you get some instruction, you practice your skills. You get some instruction, you practice your skills. Like, this is a really basic formula. And there's very little of it actually happening, right? Then you look at the skills that they do give students. And the most difficult of them tends to be, for most people, like, you know, pretty specific grammar or very specific styles of writing or high level math or science. Well, none of those things are used by most people in most jobs. Honestly, they're not. And so do they need them? It's not bad to have any of those things, but is it necessary? I don't know. You could make the argument, right? But what you cannot say is that most kids are ready for any career or any job when they graduate high school, unless it's by the luck of their personality and their specific situation. It is not because school prepared them for that. So what did school do to them, or for them? It's
Right.
to them,
That's the
really.
question.
It stripped away their ability to question authority. It trained them to absolutely respond to authority, to feel virtue by doing exactly what they're told, and to feel ashamed when they don't, you know. And if they didn't, they received all these messages: you're bad for society, you're not lovable, you know, you're not worth our time, you're ruining everything. All of these things that really get into these kids' heart. And that was the thing I hated the most about teaching, is that the most brilliant minded students were the ones questioning and rebelling, and they're the ones who believed that they were the stupidest. And I was so sad to see over and over again. I'm like, no, you're brilliant. You actually have a brain left to question with, and you're not in any way defunct, you know, and they just tell you this. But it is really terrifying, you know, that so we have our kids in this situation where they're really being taught to just obey blindly anything, never to think critically. We don't teach critical thinking anymore. When we teach what we call critical thinking now, what it really is, and this, I am not joking. When I used to teach media literacy, for example, what I was teaching kids was to find out who published what, find out who their ties are with, who funds them, and therefore look for any bias they might have because of that. Look at their political donations and affiliations, and look at therefore their bias. I was never teaching them this source good, this source bad, this source good, this source bad. I was teaching them how to evaluate any source that could ever come their way for bias, you know, or I was teaching them how to analyze it for, hidden messaging, or analyze it for rhetoric that like tried to draw on their emotions instead of using logic, for example. And these types of things that could be applied to any media source ever. Now, literally, when they teach media literacy, so supposedly, what they're teaching kids is this source good, this source bad, don't go to that source, this source is good. And what they really mean by that is these sources are Democratic and those sources are Republican.
Which is
and
so frustrating.
It's so frustrating because we know the world isn't even just Democrat and Republican, but it's so maddening. And I'm like, you're literally just telling kids what to think and not how to think. You're just reinforcing that they continue the rest of their life just blindly obedient, never thinking. They don't teach critical thinking skills, like I said. And so this is what you're doing to your child when you put them in public education. You're giving them about 3 hours if it's a really good day. I'm not exaggerating. I was a teacher for 14 years all over the world, public and private schools, every situation you can imagine, inner cities, super rural, all of it, all kinds of cultures, all kinds of kids, rich kids, poor kids, all of it. And it's all the same. They are
private
never
school too, huh?
Oh, yeah.
So, yeah, because, this year, my wife and I specifically have been kind of seeking out these, I'm on the East Coast. I'm not sure how widespread they are, but they're kind of called like Sudbury schools.
Yeah.
There's a couple different names for them, but these alternative learning schools, that seems more akin to what we're going for. Of course, they're astronomically priced because it's supply and demand. It's just similar to organic and vegan and gluten-free food in the supermarket is extremely high cost compared to everything else. And it's like, what's the root cause of that? It seems like the actual education, the actual healthy way to raise our children is like pressured to be more expensive and basically impossible to reach for most people anyway. And most people don't even really know about these kinds of, they're not advertised anywhere, these alternative styles or whatever. I mean, what's your opinion on these alternative schools? I mean, are these viable within this system or close to it? In a world where we could potentially have our children taken if the state doesn't approve of the education that they're given, which is terrifying.
It's terrifying.
So,
which none of us consent to, by the way. So the first thing I'd say is, unfortunately, and it is the same with organic food and with anything really that's good for us or well made at all. It is way more expensive and so therefore prohibitive to many people. And schooling is no different. But it's not, I really don't think it's like a intentional thing or a conspiracy sort of thing where they are trying to make it more expensive. What I understand is that basically public school is mass produced learning and education. When you mass produce anything, it's cheaper. You stick 40 kids in a room, that's cheaper than in all of these much better schools, like any kind of Waldorf school, Montessori school, Sudbury schools, a lot of any unlearning school or hack schooling or any of these types of things.
Sound of that.
Yeah, those are really cool. Any of these is going to be a lot more. If you have a trained professional doing it, it's going to be a lot more expensive because you're going to have a lot less students and that person still needs to make their living and that's expensive, So if we could get, and a lot of places are trying to do this, and it's another thing that, if we're looking at the false divide political spectrum, the Democratic side is always trying to stop and the Republican side is generally trying to push, is getting the state to fund any provider of education the same as they would provide the public school for that student's enrollment. That would be a huge step in itself, because now anyone can come, for example, to me for unschooling, and I can get that from the state at least. And then the parent doesn't even have to pay me. I can just get that and, have that be it's pretty fair when you think about it. If I'm not going to public school, where's that money going? Someone should get it. So that would be a huge step that we could do. The other thing though, that I always tell people is, and it's not something everyone can do because most people can't stay home alone with their kids, but it's something you could try to eventually aim for a co-op sort of situation for, where you and a bunch of other parents take days where you take everyone's kids and you have them that day and you're going to do whatever. And whether it's a continuation of projects that somebody else started at someone else's house, or whether it's a totally new set of things that you're all doing because that's your style and the way you teach, that you each kind of take part in that. And the thing that, deters a lot of people from doing something like that is a lot of people don't think that they can. And I'm here to tell you that anybody who would even be listening to something like this is absolutely capable of educating their child at any age, because you're capable of educating yourself. And so you're capable of educating a child. And a lot of people think, well, I couldn't possibly do it as well as like a teacher or a trained professional, or these people who do it all the time. Like, maybe most teachers I've met are honestly really, really bad. They're bad people and they're not good at teaching. So that's the majority.
Yeah, I've definitely met a few.
Yeah, I think we can all relate to that, right? So Then you look at that like, well, you're a good person. You have good values. It's your kid. And you do know how to learn, so you know how to teach, and you know how to invite learning. And then a lot of people think, well, it won't be as rigorous. Let's go back. Remember, on the best day where everything works perfectly and everyone's just like in line, maybe 3 hours of focused learning. Right. So you're going to tell me you can't do that? I'm pretty sure you can do that. It's scary.
Absolutely.
And it's overwhelming for a lot of people, but that's why I provide consultations for people, so I can encourage them, like, look, here's like a basic scenario of what you could do, and it would be way better than public school.
Oh, that's really, really valuable.
My dream would be if everybody took their kids out of public school and just homeschooled them, did homeschool co-ops, not with the district, because they do it horrifyingly, of course. Everything they touch dies. But just with yourself and with your own community, you create of like-minded people, and people can come and go, whatever, but just, you can do it.
Yeah. I mean, your words, my thoughts, man. Like, we've been talking about this very same thing. If it can be done, we're going to try that at least. But then we do run into that whole, certain states, I guess, would allow certain leniencies, but, the state has to approve the education you're giving your child. I guess, would you say that there's like a bare minimum of that you could teach your child and then just get that out of the way kind of thing?
Well, yeah, I know what you mean. So a lot of states don't. And what they say usually is, we can come audit the education you're providing for your student at any time, and you have to provide us with records or whatever. And so it'd be like a tax audit, right? Like, here, throw a folder at them, be like, you look at it. Like, I'm not like wasting. Are you going to pay me for this? No, you figure it out. But if you have anything that shows that something has been happening, then that is, in most cases, it's going to suffice, right? So what I mean is, if you're like, look, here's the receipts to the day we went to the museum, here's the audio recording of us discussing it afterwards or whatever, here's the record. Okay, here's a really easy one. Khan Academy, KHAN. Okay. Khan Academy is free. It's for anyone. It tracks users. Your child can log in, and then they have this record of all the time they've spent and the subjects they've done. Nobody could ever criticize this curriculum. It's amazingly well done. It's very beautiful. It's free. I'll say that again. It's free. Anyone can do it. Nice. And it's as a high school teacher, everything that's been on there that I've ever seen is high quality, better than most schools. Honestly, very good curriculum. There's none of this critical race stuff. There's no Common Core. It's just good learning. And it's made by people who are just passionate about their subjects and just wanted to provide, and this has been growing for, 20 years or something. It's a huge database of just amazing stuff, but it's very well organized by grade and by subject. And
that's amazing.
Yeah. And if kids have trouble, they have quizzes. The kid will take a quiz and they'll say, like, hey, it seems like you're having trouble with this specific skill. Here's a video. Watch it. And then the kid's like, oh, that's the thing I was struggling with. It's very well done. And there's aspects of it you can pay for too. And I think it's very affordable, but it is free at its most basic level. So they do often say that they can come audit, but you can always have something that you can show them and say, this is our curriculum. I made it myself. And it's, and that's nothing wrong with that. They don't have to, they can't generally say you have to use this specific brand of curriculum or whatever, because it's prohibitive. They're expensive. The types of curriculum that schools often would suggest or use are really, really expensive for no good reason. Right. So it's more that. It's more the record of it, and it's more that you can show that something happened. If they really wanted to, we've seen horror stories. We've seen people have their kids taken by CPS. But I have not heard of somebody getting legally I should say, like held accountable in some way because of like the quality of their curriculum.
Or the
You know what I mean?
context or something.
They love to scare people, though. They love to. So you'll
Look, I
go in
already
and you'll
think
say,
this.
yeah, and then you'll say, I'm going to do homeschooling. And they're, oh, you can't. It's illegal. We won't let you. Like, you have to do this and this and this before you.
Right.
And they just lie. So it's really like every parent, whatever state they're in, is responsibility to look and find their homeschooling laws and see what the requirements are. And it's often just that you write a letter and send it by mail to the district. That's
Right.
it. They'll tell you have to do conferences and you have to bring a lawyer and all this stupid stuff. They'll just lie.
Jesus.
They're
I
assholes.
live in Massachusetts, so I mean, it's probably one of the worst in those kinds of situations. But we'll look further into it for sure.
Yeah.
You mentioned the critical race theory, and this is an interesting point I'd like to talk about real quick, is because this is a symptom of a much larger problem too. Of course, this idea that now people like you and I aren't really allowed to discuss critical race theory in the way we're about to discuss it because it makes us, in a headline, sound immediately racist.
Yeah.
And this tactic of constantly, allowing these more vulnerable groups in our society to feel protected by the state when they're fucking not being protected by the state. But I did want to ask you about that because I feel more than ever right now, it seems like critical thinking and the scientific method is so desperately needed in our culture right now. And isn't there something in critical race theory about the scientific method alluding to the fact that it's not,
that it's racist?
Yeah, it's racist.
Yeah. Probably because literally everything is racist in critical race theory. I mean, there's nothing that's not, and there's no situation where you wouldn't, in critical race theory, make the assumption that race was the primary factor involved, and that in every case, when the race is a person of color, then they are the victim. And in every case, if the race is a person not of color, I guess, a white person, a Caucasian, then they are the aggressor, the oppressor, and the,
Right. And this is now
the
part of the
anti-victim,
language.
the victimizer, the colonizer, all their words.
And doesn't it seem to you that it's really not about any of this shit, any of this like race stuff that they throw at us and they're making us fight about it and all that? It seems so obvious now that this is just a total sidetrack. And we can go on and on and on about critical race theory. And it's really still just a distraction, is it not?
Oh, yeah. It's look at who is the actually just like provably, demonstrably most racist sector of society is the parasite class. They like hate. They have a history of purposely trying to exterminate people of color all over the world.
Right.
And I admit some of their high level lackeys are people of color. And I don't think that really matters because overall they're predominantly very white and very old families of whiteness. They started Planned Parenthood with the express mission of lowering the Black population. These people who are creating critical race theory and pushing it are traditionally and historically and provably the most racist people who actively try to destroy the lives of brown people and Black people all over the world. So it makes sense, though, that they would use that against us because it's so easy. You look at someone, you instantly know, oh, they're white, they're racist. Oh, they're Black, they're a victim. Like, that's way too easy of a divisive tool. So it's definitely, I agree with you about division more than anything, and which tells you a lot, though. It tells you that they have to work this hard just to keep us at each other's throats instead of in unity with each other.
Would you say it's still important to try to spread the word, or should we just move on to the positive?
I think it's important to get to like the most fundamental principles of any of it and spread that, because just like I was talking about how I try to teach how to evaluate any source. So now you can take this and go apply to anything. It's like teaching someone to fish, right? Like you want them to be able to go do this independently. So the more we can break it down to like the most core principles of any of these things, then that person can take that and apply it to any situation, right? The news can pop up the next day with this and this and this, and they can think like, oh wait, what about that principle like that I learned, where I don't know, if race is being mentioned, it's probably to divide us, or like something like that, so that we focus less on like who did the buildings collapsing in New York or whatever, and we do more like what are the common symptoms of or signifiers of a false flag, right? In general. So now you can apply this to anything. I think that would be cool to see. And I think we see a lot of it, but I think it is more helpful at least. But it can be fun to talk about any of these topics. So I don't think we need to abandon them or feel like we're like,
there's always new people coming in that need to know, right?
Right. And I forget that. I will just like talk about stuff and then someone and I'll be like, this was a really boring episode I just did. It's stuff everyone knows. And then I'll have people commenting and messaging me like, that was amazing. I'm like, oh, okay.
Like, sorry, I forgot I was having a level 4 conversation. I didn't realize it.
Yeah.
Well, so, okay, we've kind of got into the idea of, go to the root principle of it, because I'd really like to talk about how you've been writing your books, because that is something that I, as a skeptic on one hand, yet a psychonaut, spiritual guy on the other hand, I've always wrestled with channeling and all that kind of stuff. And this past year, I've had a couple people close to me get into it, and I've been like, is all this real too?
Yeah. Yeah. And it's weird for me because I realize more and more that I've always been doing these things that I now do a lot more intentionally and have like names for, and, but I just, at the very basic level, let's say we go back to whenever in my like 20s or something, right? And I'm mostly writing poems and articles, and whenever I'd have to sit down and write something intentionally, like I'm going to sit down, I'm going to write this, it was always just straight shit. But if I like was doing something and I had a thought and then I had this like vision hit me and I was like, whoa, that would be a really cool like poem or something or an article or whatever. And I just like rush home to like scramble to like get it all out and then edit it. And I'm like, wow, this was like really, really good. Like that was like the basic levels of it, right? Where like inspiration is literally like striking you and you have to like rush to get it out. But I didn't think about that any differently than, I don't know. I never really thought about it at all, to be honest. It was just something that happened. Right. But when I started writing my book, the first book in my trilogy of the Sine Curve of Aeons trilogy, and it's called Phytalis. And it actually struck me in a trilogy form in my mind one night, fully formed. So I just like got 3 books in my head. I was like, whoa. And I had to rush to like jot down, and I still have it somewhere, but it's just like a sentence or 2 for each book. And that was it. It was just so I could remember like the feel of them. And I thought to myself, like, I don't write fictional novels. I don't write books. I don't know how to do it. I've never been taught. I've read a ton my whole life, but I don't know how people, and I've always thought I could never do that because I read a book like, I haven't read Game of Thrones, but let's say Game of Thrones, for example. And I think to myself, how could anyone come up with this much detail and this many layers, and these many things that like come back to get you later that you never saw coming. And like, I'm just like, how do they do this? Is like genius, So I was pretty sure I couldn't even do it, but I was like, well, it came to me, and I had just heard this woman talking about her book, and she was talking about it like a crazy person. And I was thinking, this person is schizophrenic. Like, I guess a lot of writers just must be schizophrenic because the way she's talking about it, she's like, I see and hear my characters. I know they're real. And I know that inspiration came to me, and that if I didn't get it out fast enough, it would go to someone else. And I'm like, that sounds pretty kooky. Like, you're living in a delusional state, but you write really well. So that's kind of cool. Right. So I went to try to start to write my first book, and I was kind of thinking about that. And I was like, I don't even know how to do that. I don't know how to become crazy either. So I guess I'll just like start writing and see what happens and try to get something of this story out. And maybe it'll be shorter, and maybe it'll be like, just painstaking, and maybe it won't even be that good, but I will have tried. And I sat down, and I think part of why this was able to occur for me was because I was such a blank slate for it. Like, because I had never had any formal novel writing instruction. Mm-hmm. So when I sat down the first time to just write, I'm like, I don't even know how you start. Like, I don't know. And I was like, I just like saw a scene in my head and I was like, okay, I'll just start somewhere. Like, I don't know where this is, but I'll just like start describing this place, you know, and then I'd like see a character come up in my imagination and I'd be like, oh, that's a cool character. Let's put them in there. And I'd like start describing them. And then their name would pop into my head. I'm like, okay, this is a cool name. Like, wow, this is all just kind of like coming to me. And I would just write, and then I would just, and then I would stop and be like, wow, I just like wrote a whole chapter of a book. Like, that was crazy. I didn't even know what was going to happen. And now all these things have already happened. That, like, hopefully that keeps happening. And then every time I sat down to write, I would start getting images and like characters would pop in. And eventually I started realizing, this is what that woman said. She said she could see and hear her characters, and that is what I'm doing. I'm seeing them, and then I hear them talking to each other. Not like hear. I'm not like hearing voices, but I like.
I get you.
Yeah, I like understand the words that they're sharing with each other, and then I write it all out. And so I started to understand, like, I'm pretty sure I'm not even writing this book. I'm pretty sure I'm just sitting here as like an antenna that's receiving it from somewhere. And I still didn't ever think of the word channeling. Right. I was just thinking like,
well, it's
this
the
is
stupid stuff, right? It's the stupid stuff in culture. Nobody that's all
you're
the
not allowed to.
woo-woo stuff.
Yeah. Right. And I eventually started having the experience that the things that would come into my head to be put into the book were things that I could then later look up on the internet, and they were real things. And I was like, well, that's crazy, because I did not know those things and they still came through. So then I understood something's actually happening. Like, it's not just imagination. It's not just inspiration. It's not that I like had read so much and written so much that I do think I had read so much and written so much that I was able to write well already. So that definitely obviously helps, because it got my brain out of the way, you know, so that like inspiration could just come through. But if I'm being shown and told things in this space in my mind that I couldn't have known otherwise, then clearly it's coming from somewhere. So then I got kind of weirded out, because I was like, well, then just like that woman said, these characters are real and they're somewhere and they exist. And I don't know if that's like a physical space somewhere and I'm like spying on them with my third eye, like writing their story, or if they just exist in that realm of imagination, but it's still real somehow, you know, like I don't pretend to know. Like what is our imagination if it's not some sort of access to our third eye or some sort of spiritual vision, right? We create with it. Anybody who's ever manifested in any way knows that you have to imagine it pretty clearly, and then it happens. Like if you're good at it, if you're practiced at it, and if you're kind of
practicing.
Like,
oh man.
Right?
I've been reading a lot of Neville Goddard. Have you heard of him?
No.
He is a force to be reckoned with. You got to check him out on YouTube sometime. He's an older guy. He's long gone now. But he was back in like the 50s and 60s talking about manifestation. He compared the imagination to God. He said that is what we've all been really talking about this whole time. And with this aspect of channeling, this creative force, you seem also like you were perhaps kind of resistant to these new age notions.
Yes, I come to everything first as a skeptic, where I'm like, yeah, right, you're full of shit. Like, you are lying and you're just trying to get people's money and like whatever. And so I totally get that resistance to everyone out there who's feeling that, because I do it automatically. I do not trust people. You have to prove yourself to me. And once you do, like, then I might trust you. And I've had a lot of like spiritual teachers, and they all had to prove themselves to me too, where I was like, sure, yeah, you can totally do this ceremony or whatever, like, you know, and then they would do it and I'd be like, holy crap, like, whoa. So I totally get that. And yeah, I am resistant. I just see so much like crap out there. I mean, I see people who are like, I don't know, I was in the bathroom one day and these women at this restaurant were talking, and they were like, I, put out my fairy house and I called the fairies in, and now the fairies are living in my yard, and I like talk to them at night and stuff. And I'm like, dude, what is wrong with them? But I have to stop now, because I've had so many times where I have like been like, this is bullshit. You're bullshit. That's bullshit. And then it's been proven wrong. And I'm like, oh, okay, maybe fairies exist. Maybe those women invited them to our house. Maybe they talked to them. None of my business anyway. Like, just let it go and stop being so judgmental, because I don't know anymore.
Yeah, I used to look at, so you've heard it a million times too, the paranormal, all of the stuff that we're talking about. The more you pay attention to it, the more it pays attention to you. And as a skeptic, what does that sound like? That sounds like bullshit. You know what I mean? At first glance, it always sounded to me like, well, that's a perfect cop-out. So everyone interested in it gets to experience it. Oh, great, cool.
Yeah.
Like, no shit. How about that? What a coincidence. But then now understanding manifestation, it does kind of seem like that it actually is manifestation itself that's doing it.
Yeah, I mean, it's our imagination. It's also our attention. You know, I had this aura reader who, again, I was like, whatever, but I'll try it, right? And she was like, you have this direct line to this very powerful guide. And he's like really sick of you not listening to him. And I was like, yeah, right. And then I was like, actually, I wonder, in my head, I'm like, I wonder actually if that's my dad because he's dead. And she said out loud, it's not your dad. And I was like, ooh. Oh, so you are something like real. So then I like kind of listen. I'm like, oh, I wonder if I actually do have this connection to some sort of guide and I'm not listening to him. And she's like, yeah, you are. You're not. You need to. And she was like pissed at me and like sent me away. I was like, whoa, okay. So I purposely started giving time to that. Like, I'm going to sit. And I had teachers who were teaching me different practices of like how to get more clear and more aligned and be in a space where you can ask to hear your guide and see what happens. And now I am just blown away because it's just like the channeling thing where I'm like, there's things that there was no way that I could know in any other way. And this guide or whatever other set of energies that I am then intentionally aligned to, immersed in and inviting to communicate with me, like can show me these things that were like, there's no other way I could know. So I'm like, okay, she was right again. So I've learned over and over again to be more humble and to be less judgmental and to also be more open to the skills that all of us have. We're just very, very trained out of them. And we're made to think that, only someone really special or like chosen or like, which is dangerous thinking anyway, really dangerous. But like literally anybody can do any of these things, and I think that same education system that corrupts us and the media and all these things that just corrupt us, they also distract us. They teach us to be distracted and shallow and to just run from one sensation to the next sensation to the next sensation and never sit and reflect and be contemplative and never give yourself time to just be quiet. And all of these things you would really have to do, including emotional healing, which like we talked about before too, is another thing. It's like, oh, there's something wrong with you if you even want to talk about emotions or express emotions, right?
And it's weird too, because it seem like there was like a grace period where it felt like we were heading in a really good direction culturally, where things like that were more open-minded. At least from my perspective, this could just be my tunnel vision, that I was becoming more open to things too that I wasn't before. And suddenly it just started to curve back around. It doesn't seem like a natural progression because it does seem, you look through history, it does seem like there was an ebb and flow to these very enlightened periods and then very low vibration periods. But it seemed like we were just about to enter one, were we not? Or maybe we are, and the negativity is part of that?
In the broad view, it's always the sine curve. It's always exactly as far up as it is down. And so I think we're still in the trough. And maybe we're going to start heading up soon. But when you think about what that really looks like on the minor, if you like zoom in further, there's going to be little like jagged stuff all over, right? But overall, it's going to like describe this smooth curve. Just like any graph, if you zoom out or in, right? So I do think, we experience these sort of vacillations of light and darkness. And I think part of that is like a necessary purging and healing. If you think about the way you even are, your body gets ill or sick, and you first sort of feel like crap, but then you're like, no, it's not that bad. I'm probably okay. And then it gets like worse. And you're like, oh my God, actually it's way worse. And then you're like, no, actually I think I might be okay. And then you're like down and you're like down for days. So there's even in that, like there's this vacillation, right? And I think it's like that. So I feel like a lot of people feel that what you're describing is like, oh, people are about to wake up. There's like more spiritual energy around than there ever has been. And we're like, maybe we're about to unite finally and like take out this parasite class or whatever. And then they're like, COVID and masks and vaccines and all this stuff and like lockdown. And we're like, oh my God. And especially if you're just sort of like deepening into any kind of like spiritual or emotional place, and then you get hit with all of that, that's like the moment where you can really break and run back to
Or-
the other side, right? Or
Right.
shoot up. Exactly.
Right,
So it's
which is
like,
what we were talking about from the beginning.
yeah, it all comes back around.
Yeah. I mean, we were both saying that 2020 and all the chaos actually inversely was very, very good for us.
Very. It's like a catapult, where it's just like flings some of us forward, and then some of us like fell down to the ground, and we're like, I don't want to fly anywhere.
Yeah. So, I mean, back to this channeling thing, right? I've been turned on to a few of them recently that I'm very curious about. I will say that my wife has introduced me to them, and it's in the background. I'm like, yeah. And then suddenly I'm like, well, wait a minute. That sounds like this guy. That sounds like this author I read 10 years ago. That sounds like Alan Watts 30 years. Like,
Yeah.
it seems like there is a way to almost prove authenticity, but you kind of have to be spiritually awake, dare I say, to kind of notice it. And it's this, my friend mentioned this term to me, spiritual principles are always aligned. And it seems like all the channelers that are popular have the same simple message. They talk about the same exact nuances, the same perspective, it seems. It almost seems like not a person. It seems like a mentality that's coming through from multiple points of light, almost. And that kind of seems to me like the driving idea that we could push open and kind of make channeling maybe more widely accepted, or maybe more people would be open to learning about it if there was a way to kind of show that this wasn't just one person's perspective being provocative on stage. You know what I mean?
Yeah. It's
Like,
I understand totally what you're saying. And I think we can bring it right back to that thing where we're saying, like, what are the principles then? What's the most fundamental aspect that I want to look for? Because it can help us weed out, because also, just because you're actually truly channeling doesn't mean you're channeling something positive necessarily. And a lot of what is negative can be sort of veiled in what's looks positive. So for example, like you're saying, that universal message, if it's promoting love and harmony and unity and, like, you know, healing yourself and healing others and having good boundaries and, you know, all of these things that you can just say, like, yeah, well, that's good, then it's cool, right? If it's saying something like you need to go harm yourself or others in some way, even if that way is sort of superficial, right? Like sometimes people are like, give away all your possessions and go move into this cave and start doing, like, you know, sweats every day. Right. And it's like, no, maybe if you're called to do that, do it. I'm not saying don't do that.
I'm saying, like, for days, you know.
Yeah, I'm saying there's a lot of these groups that are like, you have to do it this way, or there's a lot of these channelers that are like, you need to do this, this, and this. You have to eat vegan, and you have to, like, this and that. And it's like, well, honestly, as far as I've delved into the spiritual and been in contact with these, like, pretty amazing forces now, and, like, pretty directly, there is no judgment about what you eat or what you wear, what stuff you own, or anything else like that. It's really shallow to think that we can have rules about that would somehow apply on a spiritual plane. Like, your guide doesn't care. If, on the other hand, whatever you're doing and being around whatever is giving you a negative or like a distracting or like a whatever, then it will be harder to be in line with that. And so if you personally feel negative about eating meat, you shouldn't eat meat.
Right.
I don't feel negative. I feel great about it. So I eat meat, and I'm totally in line with my highest spiritual self. So I think, like, if there's these messages of, like, here's how you heal yourself, and here's how you get clearer and cleaner, and here's how you invite others to do it, and here's how you start to, like, fix the things, and here's how you take time for yourself, and here's, like, all those beautiful things, those are awesome. But you should just always be wary, I think, of being told ultimatums or how you should, like, live on this superficial level. It's pretty, I think it's pretty disingenuous, you know, but I think sometimes we can get messages like that for ourselves. Like, I was microdosing a lot for a while, and it was great and it was helpful and all these great things were happening. And then one day one of my guides came to me and was like, stop taking mushrooms. I was like, whoa, okay. Like, I'll stop. And I did. And who knows, I've had friends that started to get, like, ulcers from it. So maybe it was, like, preventing me from, you know, getting an ulcer. So I don't know, but I would listen to personal messages about that, but I wouldn't ever listen to someone trying to tell you that you're supposed to, for some spiritual reason, live or act or dress or do anything a certain way. So take it back to those fundamentals, I think, is a really good idea.
It goes right back to how we educate our children, right? Not what to think, but how to think.
Exactly.
How you guys can get together and do that, how you can do this, but not what to do, not where to go, what, this and that.
Absolutely. And if you do even 1 hour of that a day, you will have educated them more than any public school ever could. Because they can literally take every single moment, which a true spiritual master would do too, every single moment as the deepest learning experience of all.
Yes.
No matter what
Walking
is in
meditation,
front of you.
right? Try to bring it into everyday life, right?
Exactly.
Well, it's been really great, Lindsay. I really appreciate you coming on and sharing your perspective with us. I've been a huge fan for a long time, and I really appreciate it. Just before you go, well, first of all, plug everything. Please plug everything. Don't rely on me. I'll forget half of it.
Yeah, well, I forget half of it. And I'm the one who does it. So I totally understand that. There's a lot. So my main thing is my show, Rogue Ways. Right now, it's still on YouTube, even though YouTube has given me some strikes. And I don't know how much longer I might be there, even though I don't consent to them kicking me off. I do have a Rockfin channel. And so Rockfin is ROKFIN.com/Rogue Ways. And if you go there, you can find... it's a backup channel and its own show. There's Middle Path is only on Rockfin. It's another show I do. That one's a lot more dedicated to the spiritual. And Rogue Ways is just kind of everything. I just love everything. Conspiracy, science, like culture, philosophy, just all kinds of stuff. So Rogue Ways and Middle Path will always exist, especially on any podcast app or iTunes or anything. So you'll always be able to hear them at least. But if YouTube does go away, Rockfin is the place to go. So you may as well go there now. That would be great to see everybody there. I have a community that's social media. It's sort of like Facebook, except nothing gets hidden or oppressed. You can actually see every post and comment, and that's in rogue.locals.com. It's super cool. There's just nothing but awesome people there. And it's if you want to feel good and like be yourself, this is the place for you to go. I do have my book, Sine Curve of Aeons, Phytalis, and then Earth, A Trough in Time is the sequel. I'm working on the third one now, and those are both available on Amazon. But I also write articles, poetry, and I make orgone pendant jewelry and art. I make crystal and stone necklaces and earrings and rings. And all of those are infused with a blessing. I do spiritual work as well. I do tarot readings for people. I do what I call guidance sessions, which is sort of like a spiritual counseling session. And then I also do ceremony and healing sessions, which is a lot deeper and would be good for anyone who thinks they might have some negative energy or attachment to them that they want to try to clear out, or, if they want to get in deeper contact with their allies or just learn more about their own spiritual path and sort of where they're headed, then that would be good for them too. And I think that covers most of what I do.
Absolutely. That's great. So before you go, if you could just give one condensed little piece of advice for anyone on the brink of self-discovery, anyone trying to get past the fear and right there on the edge, ready to wake up, but still barely smelling the coffee, what would you say to them?
I would say you are exactly where you're supposed to be, and you are exactly who you are supposed to be, and you're doing exactly what you are supposed to do, and you're never, ever alone. And if you need help, you can always call out to your highest self and your spiritual guides, and help will appear.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Deep Share Podcast. If you want to hear more, then hit that subscribe button. Follow me on all the social places, and remember, think for yourself, but don't always believe what you think.
Human sacrifice, dogs and cats living together, mass hysteria. Enough, I get the point.
You have meddled with the primal forces of nature. And you will atone.
What do we know? What do we know? If I know what we know, then I can tell you what we know, and if someone else knows, okay? I mean...